Step into the realm of wonders with Paranormal M. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and prepare to be captivated by our latest thought-provoking tales. Your journey into the extraordinary begins here. We hope you enjoy the ride. Ghost. Well, how did my daughter know? My partner's blind, so a nanny takes her daughter, she's 3 years old, out for walks on weekends. She likes to go see horses, which are in her field at the end of an alley, just around the corner. That alley has a few row houses and one farmhouse at the end. It's named after a cave and a well that used to be there. Now that it's closed off, let's call it a pit road, not to bother the translation. Today my daughter came back from her usual Sunday walk, almost in a panicky state. "Water!" she yelled. "Someone's fallen to the water, must be saved." Our nanny, thinking she was afraid of the deep puddles in the field after the heavy rains from the past days, she didn't think much of it. When she came home, my daughter cried for me. She heard a man scream from the water. He called her name and asked for a hand to be saved. She said the man was fallen. She said something was with him, and that person too needed help. I never told her this story, but in that exact alley used to be a cave and a water well in the front garden of a little house. And sometime close to maybe a little bit after World War II, a man in a wheelchair fell into that well and drowned. After the incident, they filled up the cave and the well was shut off. A few years ago, another man committed suicide in the same lot. He drowned too, but in his bath after taking tranquilizers. I never told my daughter these stories as she was too young. We tried to calm her, primarily thinking she was afraid of the deep puddles, but then she became angry with us because we didn't take her seriously. She insisted that 2 men were screaming for help, calling her name, and asked for a hand to be saved. My hair stood up right as she told that story, that the one man couldn't move his legs and had no hair, which matches the description of the man in the wheelchair. What should I do? I guess the cat's out of the box now. My encounter. Hey, so this happened back in, I think, 2008 or 2009. 22 now. So back when I was 8, my mother and baby sister shared a birthday, and we were celebrating it. I'm Mexican, so back in these little parties lasted way into the night. Needless to say, it was dark. I was jumping on my trampoline with my cousin that was positioned to my right side of my house, looking toward my neighbor's backyard. While I was jumping around, playing with my cousin, I remembered falling to my knees to rest. I looked toward my neighbor's yard and saw this white translucent figure. It was kind of deformed, really. I remember it having 2 deep, dark holes where its eyes should be, and a gaping black hole of a mouth opened, and a 4th hole directly in the center of its head. And no, it wasn't small either. I remember it being decently sized. I would estimate a 2 in radius, maybe. Either way, I also recall it having arms, no visible hands, and its bottom half kind of dissolving to nothing, like a gradient effect. I remember it so well, yet I only ever saw it once in my life, probably for roughly a minute, because my cousin and I looked at it and got scared when we realized it's a ghost. Then we ran out to tell parents. That's basically it, though. Has anyone experienced an encounter like this? Or maybe even the same entity? I've had other encounters like shadow figures and hearing my name called out. When I went to ask any of my sisters if they called my name, they all denied it, even though I'm 100% positive my name was said. Moving chair. 2022. So about a year ago, when I used to live with my parents, stayed in my old room I had with a desk and an office chair. So I was on a Discord chat with a friend I made over the internet. We were talking about their experiences with a demon. A very sad story, honestly. It was late into the night and I was actually sleepy, so this probably had something to do with being sleepy, but while I was telling them something, I had my eyes closed because it's nice to talk on the phone with my eyes shut. But suddenly I hear the wheels of my office chair. I always tuck it under my desk, and it rolled. And I opened my eyes, whipped my head toward the direction of my desk, and all I see is my chair like 2 feet away from where it's supposed to be, and the jacket I put on sway a bit, as it had just moved. Now again, I was sleepy, and it could have been my head making it up, but I saw my jacket on that chair move. I had like 2 jackets on that chair. I shouldn't have been able to move without my assistance, not to mention there was a rug behind it too. So it would have needed some force to move it like 2 feet away. So yeah, I freaked out, had a little panic attack, and I hung up the call with my friend and told my parents. So I told my mom and my dad to give me this liquid, maybe holy water. My grandma gave them. My mom said I had to dip my finger and dab the back of my knees and inside of my elbows and the back of my neck. Does anybody know why that is? I need some explanations. Anyways, that's all, and next time I'll tell you all about some shadow figures I witnessed. The cat said goodbye. I work the graveyard shift for a residential rehabilitation company, meaning I work inside the client's home. When I first got started with this company, I had 2 specific clients I would work with every week. They lived in the same house. I was going on 3 months at the company at this time, and my clients were super high functioning and would go to bed super early. They usually wouldn't wake up until their morning staff arrived. This meant that I could frequently get away with sitting outside to vape for extended periods of time. During these first 3 months, there was a collection of neighborhood cats. They would wander around, and frequently they'd come up to me and let me pet them. I feel like I'm a cat whisperer because I've never met a cat that didn't like me, and I have 3 cats of my own. Well, one day when I was out for work, the next-door neighbor's house caught fire and started burning down. I had to call the fire department and try to keep it from spreading to my client's house because of the proximity. It was a whole ass mess, and not very fun night. Well, about a week later, the owners of this house asked me if I'd seen any of their cats, showed me pictures, and I'd seen one of them because he would come up to me all the time and get pets when I'd sit outside. Side note, it was hard to get this cat confused with other cats in the neighborhood because he was a chunker. He was blind in one eye, had a mustache with the way his coat looked. They got really excited to hear the house, and mind you, I literally pet this cat the night before they came asking about him. That was the last time I saw the cat. Well, eventually they started clearing out the house, and unfortunately they found all 3 of their cats dead in the house, including the one I thought I had pet. As soon as I heard what had happened, a chill went down my spine, because I realized I was possibly petting a ghost cat. I guess he liked me enough to come say goodbye before he passed on. I try not to think about it though, because it's my only ghost encounter where I can't explain it away with logic. The only logical explanation I can come up with is there was somehow another fat, partially blind tuxedo cat with a mustache in the neighborhood. But the fact I never saw the cat again makes me feel like that's not the case. Is this a ghost or just my imagination? Hey, I just want to know if this is something explainable or if this is a ghost kind of thing. To be honest, this could just be a mimic. I don't really know anything about them, but it happened so long ago and nothing similar has happened since. One night when I was roughly 14, I was taking a shower at 10:30ish. My brother knocked on the door saying to hurry up because he had to take a shower. He did this often because I would accidentally take showers when he did. So I hurried up, got my stuff together before leaving. Walked out of the bathroom and thought I saw him in the room next to my room. It was dark, so I couldn't really tell. But it wasn't like seeing him, it was like sensing he was there. So I just walked on to my room without a second thought. It seemed a bit weird, but Thought he was holding his phone up to his face like he normally does, but I didn't see any light. But again, didn't really think about it until afterward. As I was walking, I kind of walked a bit cockeyed, almost bumped into him. So as soon as I reached my room, I turned around to say sorry. But no one was there. Turned on the light to see, and he wasn't there. Mind you, we could have just walked away without me noticing. He's not that quiet. He was right next to me. So I quickly walked back into my room, completely freaked out. Still have no clue whether this was a ghost or just me being tired. I'm ready to go. I have a few unexplained ghost stories that I've experienced over the years. A really quick one. I was working at a steel fabrication shop for like 25 years. Our regular start time was 7:30 a.m., and when overtime was scheduled, we would work to it prior to start time. We would go through periods when we would work overtime for months on end, so much so I wouldn't really need an alarm clock to wake up as my body was so used to it. Anyways, I was in the middle of this period of OT. Starting work at 4 a.m. till 4 p.m. Took me about 45-50 minutes to get to work from my house. So I would wake up at 2:30 a.m., get dressed, pour a cup of coffee down my throat, get another one for the road to go. I live in a rural area, so there usually isn't anybody awake in my neighborhood at that time in the morning, except me. So I go out to my back door. My car, 2000 Honda Civic, was about 15 feet, slightly to my right of the back door. There's a woman sitting in the back seat. Stopped dead in my tracks, just watched her. She looked to be white or Hispanic, long dark hair and pale, in that lighting anyway. Just sitting there. She was sitting in the back seat on the left side, behind the driver's seat, not looking at me. I don't think she noticed me at all, and I'm just paralyzed. She was looking out the left hand of the window, looking as somebody who's riding in a car on a not-so-exciting drive. After probably a minute or two, her gaze drifted to the front windshield, still not at me. She just sort of melted back into the seat and the shadows disappeared. I told my wife later that day, and she just looked at me like, yeah, sure. And yeah, it was dark out at that time of day, but sane people are sound asleep. But nope, I wasn't dreaming or half asleep. My adrenaline was pumping as soon as her presence registered in my brain. My heart was pounding. I approached the car, shining my flashlight over the interior. No one there. My haunted house. Let me just preface this story and say that I've always witnessed and experienced strange supernatural things since I was little, currently a 27-year-old female. I was much more open to it when I was younger, and I can tune in or tune out, but I have myself distanced at this time. The experience below was one of the most profound supernatural experiences I've ever had, and something I still think about. Back in and around 2010, my family relocated and moved to a home in Arizona. At the time of this story, I'm about 14. The home was built in the 80s with some sort of strange floor plan and had only one previous owner. From what the neighbors told us, an elderly couple had lived here. The wife passed a few years before, and the husband lived there alone after that. The neighbors said as he got older, he was going a little senile, digging holes in the yard and coming up with strange projects like putting out globs of rock and cement into the yard. He was moved to an old folks' home, passed away shortly after. That's when my family moved in. Right off the bat, I felt that home had strange energy. As I mentioned, it had a strange floor plan. The dining room was in the center, sort of walled off into a circle. When you walked to the front door, my parents' room was to the right, then continuing around the circle, you'd be in the living room, then kitchen, then you'd be facing the office, and to your right there was a wing that went down the hallway to my room and my brother's room. From above the house looked like a lollipop. Hope that helps visualize it better. Well, we started renovations pretty quickly after moving in. painting, cleaning, ripping things out in the backyard. I found a large human tooth in the bathroom drawer one day. Weird and gross. But I've heard about spiritual ties to human teeth, so I wanted to throw that in there. For some reason, whenever I think about this house, I always think of that tooth. While living in this house, I always had the feeling of being watched. There were strange noises and eerie feeling, and when walking around the circle, I always felt like something was right behind me. We all felt sort of creeped out in the home, but nothing serious had ever really happened until one night. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and I heard someone in boots run in the house. It sounded like they were doing laps around the circular dining room. Thought this was odd, sat up in bed, slept with my door open, and across the hall I could see my brother in his sleeping room. My parents slept with talk radio on every night. Strange, I know, but I could hear the radio on the other side of my house and could hear my dad snoring. These footsteps sounded heavy. Didn't think it could be from my mom. Mentally, I was ruling out that it was anyone in my family making this noise. The stomping continued and I was getting concerned. My dog typically slept in the office on the couch. I thought to myself, if he starts barking, then I'll get worried. Right after thinking that, I hear the footsteps run to the office. Papers start rustling around. My dog starts growling and barking. The paper stops, my dog stops, and it's quiet for a moment. Thought that it was over, till I hear the footsteps running down the hallway toward my room. I'm absolutely frozen, believing that I'm about to be met with either a spirit or an intruder. My door is to the left of me, open. As the footsteps come closer and get louder, they suddenly stop right before where my doorway starts. Sat there frozen, waiting for someone to peer their head around the corner or something. But nothing. It was silent after that. This whole scenario lasted maybe 3 minutes. The next morning, I confronted my mom. I asked her if she'd been running around the house in boots. She told me, nope, I must have just been dreaming. She told me that her and her dad were in the room all night. Her and my dad. I started to maybe think I had imagined it. A week later, she told me she wanted to talk. She didn't want to scare me at the time, but told me that night she had heard it too. The footsteps, my dog barking, the papers rustling. She said that she was about to get up and check, also worried that it was an intruder, but it had come to a stop. All doors were locked that night. Nothing was stolen or left ajar. We lived in an extremely safe town. Both her and I believe it was a spirit, likely the old man who lived in the house before us. We continue to feel watched, could feel a strange passive-aggressive presence, but never experienced something to this capacity again. We still talk about this experience from time to time, and I'm glad I wasn't the only one who was awake in my house that night to hear it. A few years later, we had moved out, and strangely, a friend of mine had moved in. When I found out he'd lived in that house, I asked him if he felt a strange presence or even had anything happen to him there. His dad and him both looked at me wide-eyed and told me that, yes, they felt it too. Haunted Gymnasium. When I was 17, I worked at a gym as a coach to teach kids gymnastics. I won't disclose the location because it was a local gym, but it was huge and had several different areas. A movie theater, a big pool, indoor for swimming lessons, and a karate studio, etc. The entire place was run by teenagers my age and a little older. Needless to say, it was a madhouse every shift, in the best way. It's probably the most fun job I ever had. My manager was always stoned out of his mind. The owner was never there, so we didn't have to worry about getting in trouble, and we'd always fuck around after the close of the gym. Never got a bad feeling from this place. Maybe because I used to go there when I was younger for gymnastics. And even though I can't ever go back there, it still holds a special place in my heart. So weird things started happening in different increments. For instance, the first time something not necessarily scary but definitely eerie happened was during a stormy night. I know, cliché, but just follow me. We decided to close the gym early because of lightning. There wasn't anywhere safe to put everybody, so all the kids and their parents left while me, my coworkers, and our manager began closing up for the night. Closing duties were pretty standard. Sweep the floor, pretend to sweep. Mop the floor, make it look wet. Check security cameras. We never did. What can I say? We were young and didn't care. We all went to different sections around the gym, and keep in mind, this place is big. I was in the back room of the swimming pool, where I got a call on the radio from my manager. He said for all of us to go into the office to seek shelter. There was a tornado near us. So we did. And of course, we didn't care. We were laughing and yelling and throwing things at each other. It was all just careless fun. Then we heard a deafening sound, like a chandelier shattering. We thought either somebody broke in, or lightning struck right next to us. We went to look, and turns out one of the beam lights from above came crashing down, breaking into a million pieces. We didn't think anything of it. It's an old building. The only scary thing is having to clean up the mess and tell the owner about it, so we did. Then we heard knocking on the windows. This place was full of windows, so we didn't know where it was coming from, but checked it out anyways. Couldn't find anything, not a single person, yet we kept hearing a loud knocking on the windows. This was when we all collectively said, nope. We booked it out as fast as we could, didn't even bother turning the lights off. I contemplated quitting, but realized that this was probably just some teenager fucking with us. So the next day I showed up for work again. This time, it was even weirder. We did the usual sweep, mop, bullshit, clean the place. We began closing up for the night. All of a sudden, our manager came by, saying he can't find the store key. We helped him look for hours, couldn't find it anywhere. He said we can't leave until we find the key, or else it was his ass that would get blamed. Around an hour or so later, my coworker called us all back and said, with an annoyed look, that it was on his desk the whole time. My manager swore up and down it wasn't there before, and that something or someone must have been messing with him. Surprisingly, at least for horror story standards, we all believed him. So we once again booked it out of there as fast as we could, but it wasn't over. Right when we drove away, all the fucking lights began to flicker. We were terrified out of our minds, but my manager toughened up, braved the place. We all decided to go with him. I swear on my life, dead ass, no bullshit. We saw a little girl. We all saw her. She was wearing a pink dress, Mary Jane's, and her hair was tied in a ponytail with a ribbon. I know. This sounds corny as hell. But we all saw her and probably will never forget her. We didn't say a word. We looked at each other. And, say it with me, booked it out of there as fast as we could. We all quit the next day, never stepping foot inside that gym again. Strange happenings in my kitchen. I've had a few strange things happen in my kitchen within the last 3 to 4 months. Things I can't explain. Haven't been scared at all, which is odd. The first thing that happened, I had the microwave on. Had a few seconds left. It stopped and the door opened by itself. Still had time left to open the door. One has to tug hard on the handle. My electric Breville coffee machine has gone off 3 times by itself. The last is weird. I was opening a bottle of wine, and as if something hit the bottle out of my hands, put the bottle down, left the kitchen. These could all possibly be random weird occurrences, but they're all in my small kitchen, and I have no good scientific explanation for them. Laying on the couch right now, typing this, looking into my kitchen doorway at night, wondering if it's just random, or if it's something that was interacting with me. It was watching me. Over 10 years ago, I was home from college and sleeping in my room that my mom had made up for me. It was a newish apartment. My mother was renting it. My mom had fallen asleep on the couch. I was half asleep in bed and felt like someone was watching me. I was so tired I told myself I was imagining it. Stop being ridiculous. I was laying on my left side and it felt like something or someone was watching me from the right side of the bed behind me. Figured I would just turn around and see nothing's there and go back to bed. I turned around and opened my eyes, and to this day I see absolutely vividly a tall, disheveled older man looking down at me with the most hateful of eyes. His arms were at his side and he was just staring at me with a vile expression on his face. He had short, sandy hair. He looked corpse-like. He was wearing an ill-fitting loose suit. He had some cuts on his face. His eyes were cold and evil, and I felt unsafe and in imminent danger. I started screaming bloody murder and bolted out of bed, ran to the other side of the house and woke up my mom. She said I was probably dreaming. I said, "Mom, I was awake. I felt it looking at me for a while, and he had this gnawing feeling. I wanted to disprove it." I must have laid there a good few minutes not feeling like I wanted to open my eyes, but I couldn't sleep. So I turned around. We crept back into the room and no one was there. Well, me as an adult spent a good 3 days sleeping with my mom, and then never had a good night's sleep ever again in that room. To this day, I question the experience. Full-body apparition seen floating in our room last night. Kind of blown away right now after just having a conversation with my wife. Last night she saw a floating woman figure in a flowing gown or robes above her bed and looking out toward the window. We live in a mobile home. It was bought new and given to her. There's nothing weird about the trailer park where it's located as far as I know. No one has ever died in the home, and we have zero other paranormal things that happen. Like nothing goes missing, no doors slam, no footsteps, no voices. But we've now both seen this floating figure. The first time was around 3 years ago. My dad had just died in a car accident with his longtime girlfriend. At the time, I saw twice or 3 times a floating woman figure above my bed upon waking, which would quickly vanish. I chalked it up to like a combination of sleep paralysis and the trauma of the loss. At the time, I thought it looked an awful lot like my pop's dead girlfriend. I didn't really care for her, not sure why she'd be visiting me. But anyhow, it scared the balls out of me at the time, but I rationalized it away. A couple years later, I found out that my wife had experienced a similar thing around the same time. We started discussing it, because our young daughter, maybe 6 months at the time, would wake up screaming sometimes. She would appear to be fixated on the ceiling of the room. Paranormal came up, and that's how we wound up sharing our stories with each other. Both of us are pretty rational, so I just chalked it up to sleep state or something similar. Anyway, after finding out that we had both seen the same thing, my wife said that she wanted to get rid of this antique cabinet that she'd inherited from her deceased mother, in case there was something attached to it. It had been bought at an antique store, so we give the thing to her sister. She later found out that her own daughter was waking up with night terrors talking about a lady or something following receiving the cabinet. But we had no more unusual behavior from our daughter. Given this thing away, so we probably forgot about it. Oh, we also burned some sage around the same time for good measure after we got rid of it. Then last night my daughter wakes up screaming, like straight terrified, inconsolable. She's 2.5 now. My wife and I take turns putting her back down. If she wakes up, it was her turn. So she goes to put her to sleep and my daughter's prone, being curled up tight in a ball. My wife tried to pick her up, but she didn't want to move or uncurl. So she laid down next to her and glanced up toward the ceiling and saw the woman floating vertically facing toward her window. She couldn't see a face. She thought, "Oh, there's that thing again." So she closed her eyes, tried not to freak out for her daughter's sake. My daughter refused to look up or turn over when my wife laid down. She just buried her head into my wife's armpit, kept saying something about the fan. Maybe the ceiling fan wouldn't really calm down. Eventually I went in to help calm her daughter, which we eventually successfully did. She went back to sleep. While my wife was putting her back down, she texted me something about seeing a ghost, which I don't see until later. And when I do see the text, I kind of missed it. Trick a light or something. We only just now talked about the extent of it. Kind of blown away. No sleep paralysis or drug use or any other reasonable explanation. She says she saw it plain as day. When I saw mine, it looked very clear to me. The best way I can describe it is like a scene from Ghostbusters of a floating ghost, but more transparent and ugly. Now I'm thinking my own experiences were real too. All the crazy things that happened at my house. So I live with my boyfriend, my 8-year-old son, my boyfriend's uncle, and myself. So it's just the 4 of us. We had little things going on all the time. One time the vacuum cleaner was just sitting there like it always does. It's not in use. And all of a sudden it just fell over and hit a glass door of a cabinet with enough force to shatter the glass. I was standing in the same room and literally watched as it happened. Also, things go missing constantly, then would turn up hours or even days later in a super obvious spot like right out in the open where there's no way that we could have missed seeing it before. This happens regularly. All kinds of random things in the house too. Literally makes me go crazy sometimes. There's also the shadows. We have shadows that you can see even in a dark room. Like the lights are off and the room is almost completely dark, but there will be this human-shaped area that's just way darker than the darkness around it. It's scary to be laying in bed watching the shadow of a person walk across the wall. There's no light sources to make a shadow. There's multiple shadow entities, because I've seen more than one at a time. I'll also occasionally glimpse them in the daytime moving around, but they tend to stay in the darker areas of the room, like the shadowy corner. Maybe being in the shadows makes them feel like they can't be seen or something, but I can definitely see what looks to be a super dark shadow on the top of regular shadows that are there. Plus, they move when all the regular shadows just stay still. Then there's the back bedroom where my boyfriend's uncle sleeps. It's one bedroom at the far end of the trailer all by itself down a hallway where my washer and dryer are. If you're in the living room, you can look straight through to the kitchen down the hallway and see the bedroom door at the far end of the hallway. So if the door is open, you can see straight into the bedroom all the way from the living room. Well, my grandma was over that day and she was standing in the kitchen cooking. But that side of the kitchen was hidden by a partial living room wall, so I couldn't see her standing there. Looked down the hallway and saw what looked to be her standing in Uncle's bedroom just facing the bed and staring. So, knowing Grandma's in the early strange stage of dementia, I was wondering what she was doing in Uncle's room, so I started to walk that way. As soon as I get past the kitchen wall, I can see the whole kitchen and I see Grandma standing there at the stove. I looked back down the hallway and the person or whatever it was wasn't there anymore. Uncle's also woken up to see shadows in his room staring at him, as well as some friends who stayed in that room before Uncle moved in. They actually stayed for a couple of weeks. Didn't see anything at first. Then one night the girl woke up with a horrible feeling and saw a person standing by the bed watching her. She freaked out and went under the covers. When she came back out, the person was gone. All she could say was that it was an older lady. The guy staying with her in the bedroom didn't see anything that night, but he did say that he didn't like sleeping in that room because it gave him a bad feeling. He did end up seeing something, but it scared him so bad he refused to talk about it. That's when he left. The girl left a few days after he did, saying she didn't really like sleeping alone in that bedroom. A couple of months later is when Uncle moved in. He said he's seen some weird shadows, but that so far, really nothing bothered him. I've also slept in that room once and felt fine, so maybe it's only certain people. There's probably other things that happened around here that I'm missing, but I think this post is long enough already. So in ways, I'm pretty sure I share my home with not only living people, but at least one ghost and possibly shadow entities. Heard my first EVP last week. I'd started hanging out with a new friend who I'd begun to really click with, a heck of a lot of different interests and topics, similar humor, and was just a really nice person. Well, one day we're hanging in his basement, just kicking it, when we get on the topic of unexplainable happenings in the paranormal, to which I've always been a huge, logical fan of. He asks me if I know of or believe in EVPs, to which I replied, of course. He looks at me with the most dead serious look straight in my eyes and goes, "You can believe me if you want, but I guess I understand if you think this is just some bullshit." As he pulls out his phone and brings up an 18-second long video of mostly darkness, but just a smidge of the night sky and the moon, where he gives me a heads up for his reason for recording that night. It was to have a recording of the wolves in the distance howling. Thought it was cool. Fast forward to later in the same night that he recorded it. He remembers it and puts in headphones as he's laying in bed listening to the video for the first time. He gives me the phone and turns the volume all the way up and says, "Listen to the first 10 seconds. Tell me if you hear anything." Needless to say, about 7 seconds in, you can clearly hear over the howling 2 to 3 heavy breaths, and then a low male voice saying something along the lines of, "He's your friend here," or something like, "I'm your friend here." I wish I'd gotten him to send me the MP4 of it. If anyone's interested, I'll definitely try to reach out to him to get it and post it on here. It was hella cool seeing how much I've never encountered anything like that. Paranormal entity. Moved into an apartment with my wife 6 months ago. There's been a progressive amount of events that have taken place. We're not really sure what it could be. For some background, I'm agnostic. My wife practices witchcraft. My wife has a hidden altar that looks like a small closet built into the wall. Relevant later. Since moving in there, there's always been this odd energy in the air. Notably, our cats were terrified for weeks. Maybe not odd. Cats hate change and usually take a while to adapt to a new language. Adapt. The odd part is that they would just sit at a door and stare into the darkness for hours. To this day, they're not comfortable and relaxed unless me and my partner are in the same room. Then it started happening. Me and my wife at different times started to see a humanoid shadow. It would usually be standing in the doorways or the archway into the kitchen. I have insomnia as well. Sometimes I get out of bed and go into my office as to not disturb my wife. She's told me that several times she's woken up and still felt that someone was in the bed, only to find out that I wasn't there. Thought this was a little crazy until it happened to me. I woke up and felt like my wife was curled up behind me. I believed she was still in bed, even rolled over to kiss them, only to find the bed empty. Can't express how strongly I felt that my wife was present that night. She was in the office after not being able to sleep. Then one night we're laying in bed. At the end of the bed, the springs pop and sound like somebody either stepped onto the bed or sat up from the bed. Mind you, the bed is a hybrid and very new, so I don't believe it was a matter of a spring getting stuck. Another night we're watching a movie with the door open. The cats are laying down with us in the office. In the corner of my eye, I see a shadow moving quickly toward the bathroom and out of view. Odd. Maybe it was just me seeing things. Look back at my wife and she's pale. She asks me if I was okay because I looked pale as well, then proceeded to tell me that they saw a shadowy figure standing in front of her altar, then quickly moving toward the bathroom. I admitted to her that I'd seen the same. We were both spooked, had to leave the apartment and get out for a bit. When we returned, things were calm. Later in the week, I used the restroom, washed my hands, closed the door, and as I walked toward my room, the bathroom door made the opening sound and creaked open. Quickly got back into bed and went to sleep. Since this, me and my partner continued to see the bathroom door open and close. We've heard loud crashes and bangs, and our cats are sitting in the same room with us. This apartment is older and was built in the early 70s. Even though my wife is a witch and practices witchcraft, they haven't practiced for several months. Could this be someone that died, something angry at my wife's altar, or maybe something else? It doesn't seem dangerous yet, and for the most part we ignored it and tried not to give it attention. It's also odd to me that it seems to always be in doorways. Unexpected verbal interactions. For context, I'm an engineer by education and profession, and have always been a bit of a skeptic with regard to paranormal experiences. However, my wife is very interested in the topic and much less of a skeptic. She said that there have been a few things that I and we have experienced which I can't explain. The most dramatic / hard to explain thing happened when we went on a walking ghost tour in St. Augustine, Florida in September of 2022. A month or two before going on this trip and the tour, she had gotten a Reiki massage followed by a tarot card reading. During said massage, the masseuse commented that my wife was surrounded by an unusually high amount of energy. Subsequently, during the tarot card reading, she told my wife that she had or has a guardian angel following her daily to protect her, and that this angel is the Archangel Michael. I just took it in all with a grain of salt and didn't really think much further about it, to be honest. So, on this walking ghost tour, my wife is wheelchair-bound, by the way, it was just the tour guide, another couple, and ourselves. We were perhaps midway through the tour and were all in a narrow alleyway while the tour guide told us about the history of this particular alley, when the event I can't explain occurred. The tour guide had provided us all with various detection devices, and at this point, we all had EMF meters. At first, they were all basically silent, but a little while after the guide begins retelling the history of this alley, the EMF my wife was holding became very, very active, pegging the gauge multiple times. However, the EMF I was holding while standing more or less right next to her was silent. Likewise, the guide's EMF detector was also silent. The other couple kind of had wandered off a bit but came back to where we were at this point, and their EMFs were also silent while my wife's continued to signal the presence of an EMF field near us. We then sort of began testing, found our EMFs would go off too if we got particularly close to my wife, and then silence again if we moved away even a foot or two. At this point, the tour guide, who is now using a spirit box sort of device, which I see as sort of a detuned AM radio, had just been static noise up to this point. They asked, "Is there somebody here with us?" And pretty quickly all we heard was the word yes. Then it came back to static sounds. All 5 of us did in fact hear it. Note here that at this point no mention had been made about her Reiki experience, or Michael to her guardian angel. No one present other than she and I knew that story at this point, so after getting the yes response on the spirit box, the tour guide asks if the entity that responded, as being present, could tell us its name. Then the static stopped and all 5 of us clearly heard the word Michael. Color me really, really surprised. Actually shocked might be a more accurate description. After this occurred, she shared her story from the Reiki experience with the group, and a few moments afterwards, the tour guide asked the entity, "Michael, are you here to protect her?" A moment later, all 5 of us clearly heard the word yes from the spirit box. Honestly, I was flabbergasted. Really don't know what to make of that experience, or whether it was something that one of us somehow manifested, or really what, but there was no way anybody else in that group knew about her guardian angel Michael experience. How did it happen? I have no idea really, but I do know that it happened. Ask Reddit. I was stationed in Osan, AB in South Korea in 07 and 08. This wasn't me, but a friend of mine. Back then, during exercises, it was common for those of us in the QRVs, quick response vehicles, to hide in a local HAS, a hardened aircraft shelter, during simulated attacks. It was common knowledge that there was one HAS on Bravo Diamond that did not, or rather that you did not hide in. When I asked him why, he said that they broke that rule once because they couldn't find another HAS that was empty. So they squirreled themselves away, and during the next missile attack, they shut the doors and sealed themselves inside. Apparently, during the entire 90-minute attack and post-attack recon, they heard creepy noises from random shuffling to voices. He swore he heard someone very clearly say, "Please, no." The generally accepted cause for this was something like an urban legend. Apparently, during the Korean War, the pilots left the maintainers behind in the airbase that was about to get overrun. When captured by the North Koreans, they were tortured and hung by their necks with safety wire, and their spirits still supposedly inhabited that hangar. Ask Reddit. 20 years ago, I was at a small army camp just outside Uijeongbu, South Korea, the city north of Seoul, but south enough of the DMZ that I figured we'd have some heads up if the North attacked. At least time enough to jump in the Humvee and do whatever the plan was. One night I was on the airfield, and instead of the usual skyline I was used to seeing 15 miles away, all I saw was an orange glow, as if the city was consumed by fire. I remember seeing pillars of smoke and flashes of light. I thought there were explosions in and around the city. I honestly truly thought the North Koreans were invading. I thought the city was burning. I ran back into the office and told the shift supervisor that Uijeongbu was being attacked. I started going down the list of things that we had to do and wondering if the Humvee had fuel and stuff like that I was supposed to be in charge of. And just generally freaking out, but trying to stay focused on what I was supposed to do, like what we were trained for. Well, the supervisor asked me to go outside with her and show her what I was talking about, but of course we go out and nothing. The night is dark and starry with clear skies, and the city lights are still there off in the distance. Thought I was going crazy. Wasn't on drugs and the shifts were overnight, but not long enough that I was, sleep deprived. I was in the groove of working mids. The environment was tense, but I loved Korea and had a good time there on my off time. I wasn't obsessed with war or anything like that. I wasn't a mental case who had hallucinations. I know what I saw wasn't fog or haze obscuring the city. Ask Reddit. I've had a few different experiences, but the weirdest that comes to the top of my mind is a few incidents at a friend's house. He lived in a very large Edwardian house. It was in rural England, on account of having 2 brothers and 3 sisters. Kinda looked like a mini mansion, quite idyllic. We would sit in the basement playing video games all day and occasionally go out for a spliff. When the family were out quite often, we would hear what sounded like small children running down the stairs in the hall above us. Like exactly the same sound as when his brothers and sisters were in and around playing the house like lunatics. The first few times we assumed it might be the dogs, even though it sounded like multiple bipedal footfall. So went up to check. Nope, 2 of the dogs were locked outside playing in the garden. The 3rd was asleep on the top floor. This really freaked us out. Combination of how real, audible, and unexplainable the situation was with a little dash of ganja-induced paranoia. Eventually, after a while, we just got used to it and tried to avoid going upstairs when no one was home, but just happened most times I was there over a span of 7 years, give or take, before they moved out. The other weird experience in his house was when I used to sleep in the basement when I stayed over. His brother's room was in the basement, so I'd pinch his bed if he was out. It was quite comfortable and cozy. The only problem with it is a hole in the ceiling above your head where presumably a furnace pipe had been previously. This hole led straight through the dining room, which had terracotta tiles on the floor, and a large wooden table and chairs. In the night, and only after everybody else was in bed, I would hear the chairs being dragged around above me. This terrified me. With the hole, I felt like it was too close for comfort, like whatever it was in there could see me, but I couldn't see it. Especially when I plucked up the courage to investigate and found all the chairs neatly round a table as they always were. And trust me, I ran up that basement stairwell just to make sure my friend wasn't fucking with me. Nothing, no one. Needless to say, I avoided sleeping in there at all when possible and stuck with my highly uncomfortable fold-out sofa bed in the other part of the cellar. My friend definitely heard the running noises, but none of the family heard the chairs scraping the floor. The only things they noticed were things disappearing for long stretches of time and then miraculously turning up in plain sight. Keys and wallets, etc. But in a house of 6 kids, things get borrowed all the time. Ask Reddit. When I was a kid, we used to cover up all of our notebooks before school year began and place stickers with our names, standards, and subjects on them. So what happened was when I was around 7 or 8, my mom brought home this roll of cover paper and those stickers and told me to get done with the covering by myself. She was helping me for all those years when the school began, and she thought it was about time I started doing it myself. And what I was doing instead of placing those newly acquired rainbow-colored stickers all over the house. On the bathroom door, on the floor, on the wall, everywhere. So my mom, being the responsible parent she is, takes them away and hides them someplace. I start crying, but she says that she doesn't tell. I go to bed crying in the mid-noon, and in my sleep I dream that I'm out of my body and floating. I move from one room to another looking for stickers she hid from me, and I see them lying over on a high shelf. High by the standards of a 7-year-old. In the room above. I get up and look around for the chair and carry it all the way upstairs, climb on them, and bam, there they are, lying on the top of the same shelf I dreamt of. It's one of the few memories I can so clearly remember of my childhood, and it's still kind of unexplainable, at least to me. Ask Reddit. Over winter break one year, I agreed to babysit my 6-year-old niece. My sister and niece had moved into their house about 6 months earlier. They were settled in except that my niece repeatedly complained a dog kept her awake. The neighbor's dog barked constantly, and a ravine across the street caused echoes. My sister had to leave for work at 5:30 a.m., so as soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed a blanket, curled up on the couch. I was just drifting off when I heard the steady click-click of dog nails on the kitchen floor. The noise moved through the kitchen, into the dining room, and into the living room where I was. Once in the living room, dogs circled around the couch. I was half asleep and used to frequently babysit for a family with a dog that liked to roam around at night. So it took several seconds for me to realize that. 1, my sister didn't own any pets, and 2, the living room was fully carpeted. Once these 2 realizations hit, I sat straight up just as the clicking came directly in front of me. The instant I opened my eyes, the noise stopped and nothing was there. I realized there was no way a dog had slipped in the house, so I started to try to figure out the source. The furnace wasn't blowing, so nothing was being moved by the vents. No electronics were running. I vaguely knew about hypnagogic hallucinations, so I reasoned that maybe that's what happened. Eventually, I settled down and lay back on the couch, just drifting off again when the click, 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 click started back again. At that point, I gave up on sleeping and watched infomercials until my niece woke up. I mostly dismissed the noise. My brain was maybe overacting or something, but I remembered my niece's complaints about the neighbor's dog. Thought about it for a few days and then asked her if the dog's barking was still keeping her up. She calmly told me, "It's not that dog barking. It's the one I hear walking around the house." Ghost dog is a bit far-fetched, but I have no idea what we both heard. Ask Reddit. My story is from 2005, when I was a sophomore in college. Around Halloween, my friends and I were looking for a suitably spooky experience around the campus that we could take advantage of. This was in Bowling Green, Ohio. And an internet search told us the story of the Holcomb Road. As the story went, a school bus full of children crashed in the 50s or 60s on the road, and the bus driver and several children were killed. I was able to find a story in an old newspaper confirming the crash and mentioning the death of the bus driver, but nothing on the children. Our plans were to wait until Friday night after classes, take one vehicle to the site. However, my friends started bowing out early in the week, but I was still interested, knowing my mom and aunt were wanting to visit. I called them and explained the plan. The idea seemed fun to them, and my aunt even volunteered to bring her at the time state-of-the-art digital camera. We drove to Holcomb Road around 8:30 on a Friday night in October. Stories online gave various accounts of what you might see or hear, so we decided to simply park and walk the entire tree-shrouded length of the road. The experiences started almost immediately. We had parked at the very end of the lane and began walking the 1-mile stretch of road. My aunt began snapping photos immediately, pointing the camera, shooting, and then moving the camera to take another picture. I heard it first, the slow crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. There were 4 of us, my mom, aunt, little brother, and myself. We were all walking on the asphalt surface of the road, nowhere near the leaves strewn across the forest floor. I pointed the sound out to the group and we stopped to listen more closely. Silence. I turned on my flashlight and swung it around the area. We saw nothing, thinking I'd just imagined it. We continued walking. As soon as we did, I heard it again, the distinct shuffling and crunching of a human walking through dead leaves. This time, though, everyone heard it. We stopped moving and the sound ceased. Still snapping photos, we started walking again. Sure enough, the crunching followed us, sounding no more than 5 feet away. My brother and I took my flashlight, shined it across the road, wondering if perhaps the acoustics of the woods were making a squirrel or deer sound much louder and closer than it was. As we did, my aunt kept shooting her camera, my mom at her shoulder. Suddenly, they both screamed. My mom is unflappable. She is resolute and tough, stoic in the best way to kind of describe her. She was the most stoic of all of us. She was the most skeptical of the whole trip. Hearing her scream and seeing my aunt and her sprinting down the road, my brother and I didn't ask questions. We simply sprinted after them. Coming out of the woods, breathing heavily, I got the story from them as I was scanning the forest on the other side that my aunt took a photo and the flash illuminated a man standing not 10 feet away. According to my mom and aunt, he was tall and wearing what appeared to be a bus driver uniform, similar to the one in this picture. I didn't see it, but I was eager to examine the photos. However, what we had neglected in our panic was to run in the direction of our car. We would have to traverse the woods again to reach it. My aunt and mom refused to go. They had seen something unexplainable, and they were shaking from fear and adrenaline. Bracing myself, I took the keys, sprinted through the woods, my flashlight casting a bobbing beam in front of me as I panicked. The movements were flying all over the place where I threw the flashlight in my hand. To this day, I swear I heard the sound of leaves crunching and the sound of breathing and whispered words as I ran. I made it to the car, drove through the woods way too quickly, picked up my family, drove back to my college. At my dorm, I'm sure we made a strange sight as we crowded around my PC and viewed the pictures on my aunt's memory card. In every one, there was a yellow light that stretched and bent in the frame. No matter where the photo was taken, the light remained. These pictures were taken on an abandoned country road with a foreign light source for miles. Nothing could have caused this. In the photo taken when my mom and aunt claimed to see the bus driver, all that can be seen is the yellow light across a blank white background. It's been 12 years. I've graduated college, gotten married, became a father, served in the army since then, but I still remember the lights of Holcombe Road.